Welcome back, dear listeners. You're listening to Whispers After Midnight, and I'm your host, Amity Daffodil. Tonight, we slip between the pages of dusty old books and long-forgotten testimonies, true tales of ghostly encounters collected from real people and preserved in chilling detail. These are not just stories, they are echoes. They are the footsteps in the attic when no one's home. They are the cold breath on your neck in an empty room. Ghosts aren't always silent. Sometimes they have stories to tell. So pour yourself something warm, turn off the lights and lean in close, because once the telling begins, you may start to hear things too. This first tale comes from a book called The Haunted North Country by C.T. Oxley. The Martindale Bogle refers to the ghost of a woman which troubled the neighbourhood of Henhow in 1834. A countryman who lived in a cottage at Henhow in 1834 was informed by his wife that strange noises of an unaccountable kind had been heard about the cottage both day and night. The husband may have scoffed at this, and so far as we are aware, did nothing in the way of investigation. However, early one morning, whilst proceeding to his work, he became conscious of his dog showing signs of great alarm. Glancing aside, he was startled to see in the light of early morning the figure of a woman, walking at an equal pace at the other side of a wall which bordered the road. Not at first realizing that the figure could represent anyone but someone on a similar errand to himself, he addressed it, inquiring why a child, which the figure held, should be carried at such an hour and in so cold a temperature. The ghost informed him that she had during her life lived at Henhow, had been seduced by a clergyman, and had met a dreadful and tragic end. Her seducer, said the female apparition, fearing exposure and disgrace, and in no mind to either marry her or render her succour in her unhappy condition, had met her by appointment and given her a potion to relieve her of her pregnancy. The medicine, which had an altogether different purpose, killed both mother and child, and the result was, since she was cursed, that she must wander and haunt the neighbourhood for 100 years. The man, upon returning home, acquainted his wife with his uncanny and unnerving experience, and which, as a result of the good woman's chatter, brought old memories to light and knowledge. It would seem that the older folk in the neighbourhood recalled the death of a girl and her newly born infant, and at the same time the disappearance of a clergyman 40 years previous. There can be little doubt as to the truthfulness of the man's story, and on the face of it, it would seem that both the man and dog saw the spirit of the poor woman doomed to haunt the scene of a tragic termination of life. Our next tale comes from a book called Ghostly Encounters Southwest by Peter Underwood. Charfield, a rambling place on a hillside in the extreme north of Avon, where the county borders with Gloucestershire, is the scene of some singular ghostly encounters. The beautiful and quiet old church, with its 14th century porch and marvellous outer door, enshrines a tragic memory. In the churchyard, there is a memorial to 12 victims of the Charfield Railway disaster of 1928, a disaster that left behind several ghosts. In the darkness before dawn on the 13th of October, the night passenger and mail train shrieked its way across the foot of the Cotswolds. The passengers dozed fitfully as they waited for the train to slow down into Bristol, the end of the line and only a matter of minutes away. Unknown to anyone aboard the express, a shunting engine was puffing its laborious way across the main line, dragging heavily laden trucks behind it. Suddenly, amid the drizzle and fog of that early morning, a thunderous and sickening crash awakened the sleeping villagers of Charfield. Then came a nightmare of shrieking, screaming, and crying, as injured passengers struggled for survival amid tons of splintering woodwork and twisted, broken metalwork. And then a third train ploughed into the derailed express. 41 people were badly injured, 14 dead. As Dr. Walsingham Ward carried out his grisly examinations, searchers came across the pathetic, charred, and almost unrecognizable remains of 2 more victims. They were small and almost certainly children. During the subsequent inquest, 15 of the dead were identified and named. 2 were not. One a boy of about 11, the other a girl of perhaps 7. The so-called ghost children of Charfield were never claimed. They were never reported missing, never identified. 6 of the victims of the crash were buried in a grave in the old Charfield cemetery. 9 others in a small plot together with the mysterious children, whose grave was inscribed "To Unknown." Conductor Harry Haynes of Gloucester Station had gone through the express, collecting and clipping tickets, and he swore that he saw 2 children travelling alone in a compartment near the front of the train, one a boy of 11 or 12, the other a girl of 8 or 9. But still no one ever came forward to claim or identify the children. Someone must surely have seen them off on their journey, and someone must have been expecting their arrival. It almost seemed as though they were not of this world, and as the days and weeks passed, reports began to accumulate of the forms of 2 children, a boy and a girl, being seen in the vicinity of the crash. Exactly a year after the crash, on the 13th of October 1929, a chauffeur-driven car pulled up at the gates of the old cemetery. A woman, dressed from head to foot in black and with a thick black veil covering her face, stepped out of the car. She carried a posy of flowers which she took into the cemetery and placed on the grave marked by a memorial erected by the Old London, Midland and Scottish Railway. The memorial inscribed with 10 names and the evocative words, "To Unknown." The woman stood for a moment, looking at the grave, and then she turned and hurried away. The following year she repeated her homage. Meanwhile, the people of nearby Bristol were entertained by a sensational court case involving one of their most respected citizens, Chief Constable James E. Watson, who, it seemed, had misused public funds by sending some of his officials on holidays as rewards for their conscientious work. Watson was suspended and eventually dismissed. It was the same James Watson who, as part of his official duties, had played a big part in organizing rescue work after the Charfield collision, and who had been involved in attempts to identify the mysterious pair of children killed in the crash. At first, what seemed the extent of his connection with the mystery, but when it transpired that he had disappeared, ugly whispers began to spread throughout the neighborhood and further abroad. It was suggested that the man driving the car at the cemetery had been the ex-chief constable, and that he and the mystery woman knew more than had been revealed about the unnamed children. There was no search for James E. Watson as such. After all, he was a free man, but his absence added fuel to the rumors that continued to spread. Then, a couple of months after Watson had been dismissed, his great friend, a Bristol solicitor of some eminence, Francis Hapgood, received a telegram out of the blue. It read, "Meet me at Waterloo Bridge tomorrow, midnight," and it was signed J. Watson. London was 120 miles away, but Hapgood set out and met his old friend as he had been requested to do. Apparently they shook hands, spoke briefly, shook hands again and parted. 2 days later, the body of James Watson was found in the pleasure gardens at Eastbourne. Nearby lay an open, cutthroat razor. The coroner recorded an open verdict, which seemed a little odd, to say the least, since it would appear to have been a clear case of suicide. Francis Hapgood died soon afterwards, and the mystery was never solved. The lady in black was not seen again, but from time to time, to this day, there are reports of the ghostly figures of two children, a boy and a girl, wandering hand in hand in the area where the frightful railway crash took place more than 70 years ago. These next couple of stories come from a book called The Mammoth Book of True Hauntings, edited by Peter Haney. I have known the stretch of road from the Loughlegburn corner to the commencement of Cawthorpe village proper since I was a child. Halfway down the plantation side lies a gateway, with a rutted cart track leading into it, and a clearing with a decrepit shed lying beyond. All round stand the sentinel trees, conifers mainly, with a sprinkling of deciduous wood. At no matter what time of year one passes the gateway, there is always a scarf of mist stretching out from it, lying inert across the roadway like a barrier. On days of brilliant sunshine, on mornings of sparkling frost, that mist barrier is there, always at the same point, lying still and unwavering across the path. My father, when a young man, and long before he met my mother, was engaged to the miller's daughter at Legburn Mill. He was in the habit, when his day's work was over, of cycling out to Legburn via Cawthorpe, taking the route by the plantation, and then through Watery Lane to the mill. He possessed a reasonably modern bicycle, as cycling was one of his hobbies, but in those days modernity did not extend to battery-powered lamps. Both front and rear lights were acetylene-powered, and the lamps had to be lit by hand. On one particular night, dark, with the moon about to rise but not yet risen, my father rode on his usual journey to the mill. He had turned into the plantation stretch which leads to Cawthorpe, and was passing the gateway when the front lamp of his bicycle went out. He dismounted and relit the lamp, climbed back on the bicycle, and was about to move, when the rear lamp of the cycle went out. He got off the machine again, relit the rear lamp, and once more prepared to ride off. At that point, both front and rear lamps were extinguished together. The young man was now thoroughly alarmed and disconcerted. As far as he could see, there was no earthly reason why even one lamp, still less both, should go out. Once more he relit both lights, and thereupon jumped on the bike, and pedalled hell for leather down the lane. Once out of the mysterious gateway, both lamps remained alight. He came home by the main road through Legburn village, and for several weeks gave the plantation road a wide berth. 40 years later, when I went to live in Cawthorpe, the plantation road still held its scarf of mist, and not only I, but many of the village's inhabitants felt a sense of unease when passing the place. I asked Harry Borrell to tell me of its history, and he raised his bushy eyebrows in surprise that I should not know the story. It came in two parts, and he told me the latter half first. On a Christmas morning several years ago, a local man was walking from Cawthorpe to the pub in Legburn village, intent on a friendly drink with his cronies to celebrate the season. As he drew level with the plantation gateway, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching behind him. Feeling sociable, he slowed down to enable the man to catch him up, thinking to have a pleasant chat along the road to the inn. The steps came nearer, drew level, and then passed him, but there was no person to be seen. Immediately following this unpleasant discovery, a herd of pigs dashed past him, and he was forced to leap aside to avoid them. When he regained his balance enough to look around, there were no pigs in sight. As soon as he reached the pub, he told a friend of his experience. He half expected to be greeted by laughter or disbelief, but surprisingly, his friend nodded. "Aye," he said. "When I was ditching there a few years ago, a lady in a car stopped and asked me about the place. Said there was a stone nearby to commemorate a murder. It seems that some time in the 1800s a drover had taken his stock to Louth Market and came back with a herd of pigs he'd bought and a pocket full of money from the sale of his own stock. Somebody was lying in wait for him in that gateway, jumped out on him and cut his throat. The stone the lady spoke about had been taken away by the soldiers in the last war. We don't know what became of it. It would seem the scarf of mist has replaced the stone as a memento mori in that particular place. It was a stormy night. The rain had stopped, but a wind had sprung up, and it was getting stronger every minute. Everything was in motion. Tattered clouds were flying across the moon. Great black branches tossed against the sky. Dead leaves whirled along the gutter, and the 6 of we WRAFs, brave because we were in a group, decided to take the shortcut home through the churchyard. We joked nervously as we approached the path. Beneath wildly plunging trees, the silent gravestones stood in rows, now in moonlight, now in shadow. Wet twigs slapped against our hair, strange dark shapes bobbed by the fence, and our skirts tangled around our legs, making it difficult to walk. The 6 of us huddled closer together, yet each voice grew a little louder, a little more daring. Bet you wouldn't walk across one of those graves. I would too. The spooks'd get you. Spooks? Molly's voice rose in derision. Don't tell me you believe in spooks. Bet you wouldn't stay here all night. No, I've got more sense. I'd freeze to death. I listened to them and laughed. You wouldn't have got me staying there all night either, and not because of the cold. I wasn't going to let on, but the place gave me the creeps. All those gloomy tombstones, they made me shudder. I glanced across at the church, a pretty stone building in daylight, but now just a black hulk against the sky. And as the moon came out again, I stopped, in surprise. There were people standing outside the church door. A whole family by the look of it. A man, a woman, and 2 children, just standing there, patiently waiting. What in the world could they be doing? Surely the vicar hadn't arranged to meet them at this time of night. I wonder what those people are doing on a night like this, I said to the other girls. What people? Asked Molly. Those people over there. They looked vaguely up and down the path. Where? Over there, I said, pointing impatiently. Look, standing by the church door, a whole family. They peered in the direction I indicated, and then looked back at me. There was an odd pause, and then suddenly, without a word being spoken, they all turned round and ran. Bewildered, I stared after them. What had I said? I glanced back at the family, still waiting, their clothes strangely unruffled in the gale. And then my heart lurched violently. Before my eyes they disappeared. They didn't walk away, they just went out like flames in the wind. For perhaps 2 seconds I just stood there, my mouth open, staring at the empty space. And then I hitched up my skirt and ran as fast as my sensible shoes would allow me. For our final tale today, we will be leaving the UK and heading to Montana, where we will read a tale from spooky Montana, tales of hauntings, strange happenings, and other local lore, by S.E. Slosher. Billy and I took our mountain bikes up to Whitefish Ski Resort on Big Mountain the first day of summer to ride down the Danneon Trail. We'd ridden the mountain bike trail once last summer and found it an amazing ride. We promised ourselves we'd do it often this year since we'd both gotten summer jobs in Whitefish. We parked and picked up tickets. Then we headed over to the ski lift, chatted eagerly about the anticipated run. There were tons of trails down the mountain, and we meant to explore them all. As we passed underneath the dark chalet that loomed over the ticket office and ski lift, I happened to glance up and see a figure in the 3rd-story window. It was just a dark shape, not fully recognizable from that distance as either a man or a woman, though my gut told me it was a man. He was staring at me intently. It was disconcerting. He saw me looking at him, but his gaze didn't flicker even for a second. I shivered and looked away. "Come on, Jerry," Billy called to me. He was already at the lift with his bike. Glad for the excuse to get away from the strange watcher, I hurried over, and we hooked up our bikes onto 2 separate chairs, and soon were sailing up and away over the mountain on our way to the top. I glanced down at the chalet as I drifted upward and saw the figure in the window, still watching me intently. I shuddered and turned away. The run down the mountain was just as amazing as I remembered. Billy and I called out to one another and paused occasionally when we spotted a particularly fine view or some wildlife. We reached the bottom in record time and hurried back over to the lift, eager to do it again. I couldn't help myself. I glanced up at the chalet as we passed. It loomed on the bluff over the lift, and the watcher was still there, still staring at me without blinking. I glared back for a moment, chills running up and down my spine. Then I followed Billy to the base of the lift and helped him secure his bike. This time, I refused to look at the chalet as the lift rose up and above its dark roof, but I could still feel the gaze of the watcher in the window fixed on me menacingly. I tried not to let it bother me, but I was so preoccupied wondering about the watcher and his hateful glare that I failed to heed Billy's call of delight and almost smashed into him when he stopped suddenly to point to a black bear that was ambling away into the bushes on a slope below us. "Watch what you're doing, Jer," Billy called sharply as my bike skidded on the dirt and gravel and I almost fell over. By the time I regained control, the bear was gone. "Sorry," I said to Billy, but I still couldn't put the watcher out of my mind. I wondered if he would still be standing in the 3rd-story window when we reached the bottom of the mountain. And he was, just a dark figure, not noticeably male or female, standing in the window staring at me with malice. Daringly, I waved jauntily to the figure, and Billy looked at me in surprise. "Who are you waving to?" he asked, glancing up at the looming chalet in the bright sun of the summer afternoon. "The man in the window," I replied, gesturing upward. "What man?" Billy asked. The figure was plain to my eyes, but even when I pointed it out, Billy couldn't see it. I was shaking as I loaded my bike onto the lift, and the shaking didn't cease all the way back down the mountain. Billy noticed in the end. "Dude, you don't look too good," he said, as, white-faced, I dismounted from my bike at the bottom of the trail. We were nearly on top of the chalet here, but the figure wasn't visible from the front. Thank God. I only saw him at the back window. "I don't feel too good," I admitted, something I would never have said under normal circumstances. But having a dark figure, invisible to everyone else, glaring at you from the top of a haunted chalet was far from normal in my book. We had to walk right under the chalet one more time to get to the car, and the watcher glared at me all the way. I could still see him peering from the window as we drove away down the mountain. At home, I phoned my girlfriend, who had a job up at the resort. I brought the conversation casually to the old chalet, and my girlfriend mentioned that several staff members believed the old building was haunted. When the building became a restaurant, the 3rd floor was closed down to help insulate the lower 2 floors, and no one, not even security, had a key. Yet people swore up and down that they saw a figure standing in the 3rd floor window. No one knew exactly who the ghost was. Some speculated he was a guest who had died in a ski accident. Others thought he might be a former owner or manager, returned from the grave to visit the old chalet. Whoever it was, the staff didn't like to visit the chalet after the restaurant closed at night, and I couldn't blame them. I wasn't sure if I would ever go biking on Big Mountain again, despite the gorgeous trails. That strange watcher had me completely freaked. Next time Billy wanted to go for a ride, I would suggest somewhere else. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of tonight's journey into the unseen. If these stories linger in your mind, if you feel the urge to glance over your shoulder before turning out the lights, well, that's perfectly normal. some tales they follow. This has been Whispers After Midnight with your host, Amity Daffodil. Thank you for keeping me company in the dark. Until next time, sleep lightly and dream carefully, and never ignore the knock at the door. Good night.